No preferred pronouns. Hello. No preferred pronouns. I'll take POIs verbally, please. If not, let me just organize my notes and drink water, then I'll get started. The problem with fashion brands today is that not only are they just not maximizing their reach to all genders, but because they've also denied men the self-confidence that being able to tap on fashion that is broad and available in ways that perhaps women can today. What are my 3 points of setup? The first idea is to immediately clarify that women are always going to have their fashion because it's been a built-up part of the industry already, and because the motion implies that necessarily you're moving from prioritizing them to prioritizing men in the current situation. Therefore, we believe that because a culture of fashion exists for women, it is not going to be the case that perhaps they will suffer to some extent from having less options to choose from. And it also doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be ignored because the motion only encompasses major fashion brands. Women, because the culture is already there, can always turn to firms that cater exclusively to women's fashion. In a way, this means that we're also able to allow for better fashion innovation for all genders. But more importantly, on what this prioritization looks like, we think first of all, you have to assume that these big fashion brands have the corporate and financial ability to make this shift. And the way they would do this is perhaps through advertising more for men's fashion, hiring more designers for male clothes, featuring more male models in their advertisements, printing more related to male advertisements, and expanding their own departments to include more male clothing. So I think those are the ways in which these companies are able to prioritize men. Necessarily speaking, this means that perhaps women will take up a less space inside of their department stores in the first place. I'm going to now explain to my positive material. I have 3 ideas actually for here, but the first thing I want to explain is why this is necessarily great for men. And I think we have to start by looking at the existing thoughts that males have on fashion today, or necessarily thoughts that societies have about males with regards to fashion. And it is that we've always defined males as caring less about looks and how good you look than women. This isn't to suggest that we are necessarily supposed to defend the worst outcomes of that kind of belief, but we think that in the best ways, because you're able to look and feel good, it helps to benefit your self-confidence and your sense of identity in a way that you cannot achieve without your clothing. Fashion is innately good for a few reasons. The first is because it's a unique form of self-expression that can only be achieved if you have a diversity of choices of clothing to choose from. But more importantly, what you wear is something that cannot be substituted with anything else. To the extent that you can say that perhaps as a person, I care about different qualities in a person, perhaps I care more about somebody's ability to be a good person in terms of their personality, whether they're a confident person when they speak. I think it doesn't necessarily negate the fact that your ability to wear clothes is something that is unique and can't be substituted by anything else. This is therefore the same reason why we all do things like admire different types of traditional ethnic clothing, because we recognize that diversity is really important and that your ability to look good and do things like perhaps support your culture in that context is important and valuable to people. That's why self-expression is important, because it is valuable in boosting your confidence and becoming more grounded in yourself. And to the extent that you're able to achieve this in other aspects, we suggest to you that clothing has those valuable aspects that we think should be maximized for every single individual in the first place. The impact of this is very simple. When males are the ones that are catered to by big fashion brands, what this means is that you're probably making it a lot more affordable and a lot more accessible to males because you hire more designers. That means that you have a wider range of kinds of male clothing. You get innovation, which means that perhaps the types of clothing, other than just like freaking button downs and beach shirts and all that kind of stuff that males currently have access to, gets even wider, meaning they have a wider range of choices. What this means, no thank you, I'll take you later, is that it is able to solve the problematic idea that number one, males don't have a lot of fashion to choose from in the first place, which is precisely why they don't prioritize it as big in the first place. But more importantly, you give them access to the ability to afford the kinds of clothing that help to make them look good. Because with more choice, you get more say in determining what looks good on you, and therefore you feel more confident about yourself. The second idea I want to talk about is why males are necessarily going to buy into this. And the first reason is because of the way major fashion brands are going to do this. They're going to run advertisements, and more importantly, I think corporations have economies of scale to at the very least make it reasonably affordable. Even if you want to talk about more higher end fashion brands, I suggest you then the people who are in that income bracket are still able to buy those clothes anyway, in ways that they couldn't do so previously. So therefore, we benefit males all across anyway. Even if we suggest that innovation only exists at the higher income levels, I suggest that eventually trickles down to the lower levels because you're talking about major major corporations which are able to advertise, and they have an incentive to keep it cheap so that they're able to generate that sort of popularity for their clothes in the first place. But more importantly, the reason why they're going to buy into it is because I think fundamentally, each person does want to look good in the first place. Even when we want to say that perhaps in a relationship, for example, I care more about someone's personality, I think it still recognizes that to an extent, your looks are important in the first place. This isn't to suggest that other qualities about you shouldn't be as important, but I suggest to you that it is nonetheless equally able to fulfill your sense of identity and confidence in yourself that we think is important. I'm gonna have a third idea about how this benefits the market as a whole, but before that, I'll take a POI.
Why do we even need more clothes for men? If it's true that fashion gives you an edge when you look good, why give more men more opportunities to accrue power when they're underrepresented demographics of women?
I don't think this necessarily makes sense. I think what you're suggesting right now is that somehow males already have that kind of power. But I suggest to you that on your side, it's worse when males don't have to care about these kinds of clothing in the first place, because then it becomes exclusively on women to look good. I think this means that on your side, it's worse off when women are the only kind of people who are expected to dress right and look good. I'm going to explain this to you later, but the fact that you bring males into play now means that you necessarily become more equal on both sides when the competition is about how both males and females are able to look good. What this means is that the third idea here is now going to be elaborated on. I'm going to talk about how the market is able to grow. I think that simply put, major fashion brands have a great incentive and it's probably lucrative to untap on 50% of the population that isn't really being tapped on right now, because they also have the economies of scale to make it a lot cheaper in the future, and therefore also have the ability to open other kinds of specialization into perhaps male or female clothing, that kind of thing. I think what this means broadly is that you're able to achieve more innovation and choices on our side, meaning that fundamentally speaking, your consumer welfare improves, which is great because we already established to you that fashion is important because you want to have a lot of choices to choose from, and to the extent you're able to maximize these amounts of choices, then it becomes necessarily important for you to have the access to choose the things that you want to wear. Therefore, we think that regardless of whether you're a male or female, it improves your self-expression across the board. But perhaps the final thing I want to explain, and this is in direct contention with the POI as well, perhaps maybe their case, is that it's a good thing for women as well, because these big brands proliferating the idea and prioritizing men's clothing mean that not only because your culture is solid means that you won't necessarily be neglected because you can always turn to your own firms, but more importantly, it increases the range of people who are included in the discussion about fashion to include males as well. So it's not necessarily speaking that if you look good, you get more power. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think this looks more like you have the ability to converse with your boyfriend or your husband or even with another guy friend, for example, about what makes them look good. And therefore, it isn't just expected on you to look good as a woman simply because you are part of the gender and simply because the industry is something that is big only for your gender. What this means is that you're actually able to avoid a lot of the harms in which males simply expect women to look good but don't want to do anything about themselves. Either way, what this means is that at the end of the debate, even if we wanted to evaluate from the perspective of these companies, it's lucrative and great for their industry. We also prove to you that self-expression is the most important thing because it's unique and it also helps you with your self-confidence and therefore you can look good. So even if you want to believe and buy the idea that companies are the more important part of this debate, surely we still have to win. OG.
Great. I thank Prime Minister for that fine speech. I invite Leader Opposition.
Hi, hello. Am I audible?
Yup, loud.
Okay, great. So a few points of housekeeping then. Firstly, hi, hello. For the sake of the ballot, I'm Ella, the leader of opposition. Secondly, POIs, I will only take them through chat because I get distracted really easily. So, okay. With that being said, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The clothes make the man, they say. But more often than not, these clothes worn by men are very simple outfits that are typically minimalistic and are in like 3 different colors for variety. As of status quo, there are already brands that prioritize men. Let's look at Hugo Boss or Armani, which means that there are already brands that do style for men. So why does this debate need to happen? It's simply a question of whether the major fashion brands should tap into this market and expand it, or or if prioritization of women is still the way to go. A few rebuttals then. Firstly, they talk about how cheap clothing already exists for men. It's what they already wear. If OG concedes that fashion has the capacity to give certain demographics an edge when they look good, why do we want to give men more opportunities to accrue power? I mean, women will have to look good on either end of this debate. Let's admit that women need a sense of variety in order for them to still remain relevant within society. I mean, let's look at celebrities for instance. Whenever you see the Grammys or the Met Gala, you always talk about the women's outfits more than you do the men's. But another thing then, they tell us how, oh, it puts pressure on men to also look good. Okay, let's bite this bullet. But this probably also leads to standards for men increasing as entitled men look down even further on women who are underdressed, etc. As for women having enough conversations about men with regards to fashion, why is status quo not enough? There are already options for men, and I think most women can agree that those options can look good on men. Why do we spend even more resources on this? And also, they also need to prove why men having more fashion leads to people believing men should look good as well. There is a lot of missing legwork. And another thing, why do we need clothes for men? A balance already exists within major fashion brands between men and women's fashion. And there are brands that are already targeting men. Why is this massive shift even necessary? We think that this is an opportunity cost. We'd rather spend this money on women of different body shapes or different body types or even plus sized women so that they feel better about themselves. But let's talk about framing then. This debate is about where we are able to better cater to the women, the most vulnerable stakeholders of this debate. I mean, fashion is an industry built of standards imposed on women by external forces that have been ingrained by the patriarchy. There is a pragmatic and principled responsibility for society and these major fashion brands to provide a wide range of diverse options of fashion for women so they can meet these standards imposed upon them by society, especially when neither side of the debate is able to dismantle those standards. So when demographics like plus sized women or women of color have been historically underrepresented in fashion, we are just spending finite resources on men. But let's talk about fashion brands, specifically major fashion brands. We're talking brands like designer brands like Dior, YSL, Armani, or fast fashion brands like Zara, Uniqlo, H&M. I think one important thing that needs to be understood is that these brands already do delve into the markets, as mentioned earlier. I mean, if you enter a Uniqlo, you see that half of the store is for men and half of the store is for women. So naturally then, there are two key clashes in this debate that should be discussed. A, affordability, and B, variety of options that exist for women. So what is my argument then? My argument is simple. On principle, there exists a trade-off in prioritization. Now, prioritization and expansion of this market means one thing and one thing alone. We actively choose to deprioritize women as a market. I think we underestimate how problematic this is because although in status quo we do prioritize women, we don't prioritize more specific markets within those women, such as plus size women or women with certain body types. Because let's face it, these women have certain needs that are still not being met in status quo. Let's be honest. Let's look at a typical consumer. A few things you need to note. Firstly, a men in general are typically pragmatic shoppers. You see this when your dad or your brother only goes to a Lacoste or a department store to buy a new polo shirt only when there's a special occasion or an interview that they have to attend to. This means then that the frequency in which you see men shop aren't necessarily as frequent as women. Women, on the other hand, are also pragmatic shoppers. Except their pragmatics are derived from principles that are based on this patriarchal system wherein you are forced to be novel in order to appeal to people, forced to compete with other women, forced to appeal in order to be relevant, which means that there needs to be more options in a woman's closet compared to men. This looks like social media using terms like outfit repeater or the proliferation of get ready with me, which means that women opt into fashion not because it's a mere want, but because if you don't opt into this, you are deemed as someone who doesn't know how to style themselves well or someone who lacks variety. But my second argument then is how if we raise the bar for men, we raise the bar even higher for women. expectations for clothing don't suddenly become more equal just because you target men. More likely is that it makes men more fashion conscious, taking government at their best case, and that's a bad thing. As your standards increase for what looks good, your taste becomes more critical. It's eating from the tree of knowledge. Suddenly, you know what looks good and bad. Conversely, that's why you see more often women critiquing fashion in status quo rather than men, who often don't really care about fashion beyond the subconscious level of cognition. Making those standards conscious opens up women to even more judgment from now more fashion conscious men that have had their fashion preferences more tailored by major fashion brands. Women think that fashion is a need, but for men, fashion becomes yet another weapon in their arsenal to empower themselves at the cost of women. Fashion is power. It is shaped by expectations. If you look good, you get more opportunities. But if you don't look good, you get ostracized, you get opt out. So why do we need to give more power to those men? So for all those reasons and more, proud to propose. Thank you.
Great. I thank Elo for that fine speech. DPM.
Oh crap, that is so bright. All right, hopefully that's better. All right, hi everyone, DPM, POI preference will be through chat. If by the 5-minute mark I don't take any POIs, then you may ask it verbally. If not, if I've taken a POI already, please don't unmute yourself. Preferred POI from CEO for cross industry. Yeah. And that being said, I'll manage my notes and I'll start a bit. I first want to discuss how this benefits males. This is important because this is a belief set debate and it's about societal good, and that you need to talk about the 50% of the fucking debate in order for you to be able to actually debate this out. Because understand what side opposition is truly telling these males is quite telling from their speech. They're basically telling these males that they have to be locked into the narratives that Hamilton tell you, that they have to be locked in by the birth lottery, and based on whether they look good or not, that they will never be able to change that. Understand that when Hamilton brings to you all of these cases about self-identity, about looking good and all of these things, these aren't things that are distant from males. Oftentimes, these are things that are approximate to them because you see this in each and every single day. It is the fact that society cares about each and every single one of the things that you look like. It is the fact that I have to look presentable in order for me to be able to get a girlfriend, because if I look bad, no one is going to want me, is going to want to date me. It is the fact that as I walk through that door during that job opportunity and go into the interview, that at the point in which I look bad and at the point in which I'm unable to represent myself well, that I'm going to get denied of that job because I was unable to make that good first impression. These are the things that lead towards men being hypercritical about themselves already. Oftentimes, males do struggle from self-esteem issues because these things are approximate to them. They have to deal with their looks every single day. When I look at the mirror every single day, I have to look about whether or not I think I look good or I look bad. The difference here is that whether or not they're able to actually control within the future this biological lottery on side opposition, they tell you that they should never be able to do so. And in fact, their refutations were quite telling, because what they try to point to you is that males already have centric forms of fashion that already cater towards them. The question then is, what do these centric forms of fashion actually look like? Hamilton tells you that it looks like the fact that males are consistently told to wear minimalist clothes. It is the fact that males are consistently told that they can't express themselves through fashion. That oftentimes these are things that are only locked through women. These are the fashion brands that are catered towards male. They aren't actually things that expands the optionalities of males and allows them to express themselves better, but much rather continue to lock them within the structures of society and the narratives that are continuously sold to them. And understand that this is the exact reason why is it the case that males can't use the expression of fashion. Because one, that the narrative oftentimes tells them that they can't access these things, otherwise they're weird, and because of that, they get shamed for it. Or secondly, it is the fact that they just lack choice in general and just don't have enough clothes to express themselves. For example, if I wanted to wear some really, really bright colors and wear some really, really eye-opening things because that's the type of personality I have, the fact that the fashion industry isn't invested in me means that I'm unable to do that. Or thirdly, they just lack any form of guidance. That even if these optionalities exist, it is the fact that it is so non-dominant within our sphere that oftentimes males cannot go towards someone for guidance. Meanwhile, for women, they can talk to the people around them. They can search up YouTube videos. They can look at the enclaves, like what opening opposition themselves can see of social media and all of these things in order to dictate what type of fashion they should wear or what represents them the best. The males don't have this. That's why these narratives are so important, because oftentimes these advertising companies will start to play towards these views. They'll start to play towards these things. Such as how can males better represent themselves. Side opening opposition says that this is bad because it starts to make males much more critical about themselves and their fashion senses. I tell you that on either side of the house, males are going to feel some form of deep dread about their own identities when they feel like their identity isn't matched by their looks. And that on both sides of the house, males are going to feel insecure. It is about the amount of control that you give them that is able to actually weigh this debate out. Because on our side of the house, because we give them more control over their looks, because we give them more control over their fashion taste, they're able to actually tip the scale to making themselves feel more comfortable within themselves and thus feel much better about their identity, much rather than opening opposition, who, by the way, locks them under, again, the birth lottery and refuses to allow them to move. On net, it is very clear that on outside of the house, the fashion industry gets better. But why will males even buy to this in the first place? 3 structural reasons. Firstly, it is because of the fact that the females around them will tell them about the great things about fashion and tell them about how are the different ways in which fashion can actually represent you. They'll start talking about the empirical things that opening opposition talks about. So the fact that fashion helps you represent yourself and fashion helps you feel better about yourself on a day-to-day basis and gives you much more confidence. This allows for them to actually get a real-life example and a real-life explanation to why is it the case that fashion is important to them, and thus allows them to access these benefits. Secondly, it's the fact that males want to attain these benefits in the first place. It's the fact that I'm approximate towards these issues about all the different ways in which fashion is able to actually deal with the burdens in which I face on a day-to-day basis, because I might not look the same way as I want to. This is absolutely crucial. Thirdly, it is the fact that oftentimes the advertisings within these corporations are going to look like things such as telling males about all the different benefits within these things. So these aren't going to be alienated to them. In fact, outside of the house where the fashion industry is mostly focused on males and these advertisements are put onto their face, plastered on them every single day, these are the points in which they're going to start to truly see why is it the case that fashion can actually benefit them, and thus allows them to break down the societal barriers, because it acts as a strong mechanism that buys into the idea about their deep, dark insecurities and pushing to them a solution that can actually help them, that allows for them to actually make that first move towards going against societal narratives, and thus allows for them to access these great benefits. Before I continue on as to why this is great for women, I'll take a POI.
Fashion adds expectations to both men and women. Why are you going to make things harder for both of them?
Okay, very simple. This actually leads me on to my next point, which is how this benefits women. Because understand that on the other side of the house, what they're trying to tell you is that because women suffer, that males shouldn't ever be able to access benefits. Few points of refutation for this. Firstly, you don't just ignore a person's problems just because another group is suffering. Just because a poor individual is unable to access mental health helplines doesn't mean that we stop the rich person who also have mental health issues and depression from accessing therapy. It is not a problem where because one side is benefiting and the other side is falling, that you make the other side fall. No, you raise them both up and you make it so that they're both equal. And how do we do that on our side? It's because of the analysis that Hamilton gives you. It is the fact that at the point in which males actually go into fashion, that they start to understand the qualms that each and every single woman has, that the problems that they have each and every single day. Like what opening opposition says, males start to feel the pressures of having to dress up every single day and start to feel what it is like to be shamed for their fashion choices should they not fit within these narratives. Understand that what this does is that it creates some form of communal form of relatability of this suffering and allows for not only the females but the males to both to both come together and speak out against narratives like this that allow for it to break down. You can't just have 50% of the population buying to the fact that the fashion expectations that currently exist in the status quo is bad. You need the entirety of the 100% of the population to do so. We allow for males to be much more relatable, and this breaks down the stigmatizations and the narratives of women underdressing on outside of the house. But the second thing, but the second thing that I just want to take down, the last thing, it's just the idea that, oh yeah, like women need more options and on outside of the house, no, they don't get these options. No, No, what ends up happening here when the large consumer market base shifts away from women is that smaller market base now take advantage of the fact that there is a large consumer base that isn't being attended to and start catering toward them. What this means is that you get small corporations that still fill the gap and you get thousands of those, and thus it still helps these women actually make good financial decisions and make good fashion decisions. For all these reasons, it is clear OO is out, OG is the only side that can win. Thank you.
Great, I thank DPM for that fine speech. DLO.
I am Andrea. I'll be the yellow for this round. Pronouns him. I'll take POIs through chat. Although if I don't take one by the 5th-minute mark, you can unmute. Just don't badger. Give me a second to set up my recorder and timer, and I'll be beginning shortly. Thank you. Starting my speech in 3, 2. The fashion industry preys on insecurity, and government will have to utilize men's insecurity against them in order to make this a viable economic pathway for major fashion brands to target men. And we think it's self-defeating to target men if they want to protect men because you're just adding expectations and making it harder for them. What does this mean? The way that you get people to buy clothes is to tell them that you don't look good unless you are wearing said clothes that they are selling, which means that these advertisements will showcase men having nice clothes, being able to access things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to without bad clothes. This is the primary form of advertisement we see even now with women's clothing, for example. This means that you have to prey and actively create insecurity with men's own appearances and tell them that they don't look good enough for them to buy into these major fashion brands. And we think that is precisely the harm on government. So I'm going to be charitable and engage on their clash about men and how it actually makes them feel worse about their looks. Because we tell you, if they already feel bad about their looks currently, where there are already so little standards levied upon them, when you add additional standards that they have to conform to, that they have to spend extra money for in order to look good, then you add more pressure on them to perform, to be able to do these types of things. And we think that means that people on the ground, men for example, that aren't able to afford these types of clothing, these varieties of clothing, but just men in general, will just have a harder time being able to express their identity and feel good about themselves because they're constantly told by advertisements that are capitalists that they're simply not enough. And we think that is the problem within this debate. But then second, they tell you, okay, it's better for women because suddenly men are able to come against narratives about fashion. But there's a huge missing link here. Why do men suddenly catalyze and cooperate and work together to talk about like fashion standards and expectations just because there are more opportunities for them now? It's just as likely that the advertisements that are pushed by major fashion brands become normalized within status quo because they have so much money. They have millions to billions of dollars to spend on advertisements, and they have the power to shape the narratives that create and form our society, meaning that any form of opposition against these major fashion trends and these expectations is significantly harder to push from on their end. So if they want to protect men, we tell you, let men enjoy the privilege they already have, that they can be considered to look good, even just wearing plain clothes or whatever clothes they may want to wear. And this is actually something that we want to talk about because it also generates more harm when you set higher expectations and standards because desire is the root of all suffering. When you create additional standards that people have to aspire for, no longer does the man wearing simple clothes look good. No longer does his spouse or his wife or his girlfriend consider him to look good. No longer are those clothes significant or important enough to make him feel like he is enough, that his identity is represented through his clothing. You create additional insecurity where there was none before. And we think that's the harm on their end. But then second, all these harms that they talk about coming from men, how they aren't able to express themselves through fashion, how they aren't able to access the same opportunities for fashion, how they aren't able to feel good about themselves, exists doubly for women, especially in demographics that aren't targeted. For plus-size women, for example, for people of color that constantly don't have the right color schemes represented for them in clothing, when you don't see affordable options for these type of people because they're special demographics that are exploited by large major fashion brands in order to capitalize on the fact that they have no other options to buy from. And we think this is actually a much more urgent and important harm that we have to dedicate this funding to, coming from these major fashion brands. Why is that? Because they have already bitten the apple from the tree of knowledge. They already know and they are told by society that they are not enough because of the way they look. That the fashion, that the clothes that are espoused by the majority of the population don't look good on them, that don't fit on them. And women are already actively told that they don't look good enough. And I think the harm in this debate is when you choose, as the motion says, to prioritize men over these very, very vulnerable actors who are already facing the hypothetical harms that OG and probably CG will posit is occurring to men, because we think that it is more important to prioritize these women. Okay, but why can't both of these things happen at the same time? And we tell you, if closing government tries to run this case, then we tell you, okay, if they happen at the same time, then we would rather that we prioritize, for example, focusing on plus-sized women or people of color instead. But then what about the mechanism then that comes from us, where we say, okay, about insecurity, sure, let's address that, preempting closing government. Why is that something that is structurally just more likely to have net benefits for women? Because that scrutiny, that insecurity that men will feel if major fashion brands push these standards upon them, these standards already exist for plus-size women, already exist for people of color. And there are already standards that need to be filled. So if I were to explain it very simply, for men, you are adding standards that you fill. For plus-size women or other like demographics that are underrepresented for women, you are fulfilling standards that were already there to begin with. And we think that's why it's more important to focus on these types of people compared to men, for example. But before I move on, I'll take a PY from closing.
If insecurity is still not as you characterized, why should women take this on their own?
Okay, why should women take this? It's not a matter of them taking it on their own. It's a matter of it already existing, and therefore okay, let's say there are movements that work to dismantle these types of narratives. The fact is it will exist, and this will exist on either side of the debate. The question is where you're able to utilize or best utilize your resources and not waste opportunity costs to make these options more accessible. But lastly, just directly targeting the assumption from opening government where you're not able to express yourself through fashion. There are already colorful clothes and different types of clothes for men that do exist. They just aren't as readily as available because there isn't enough demand to justify that. And we think that's a good thing because the men that do want to express themselves have the opportunity to. It's just there's not a lot of them because there's not a lot of pressure being put on men in the first place. But then lastly, responding to that last minute claim of like smaller businesses coming in. Well, we think that's harmful because A, the only businesses that are able to capitalize and provide these special resources are probably high-end small brands that are able to capitalize on smaller demographics of like men or women, for example, and price goods higher. What happens with major fashion brands is it lowers the cost of production because of the scale of economy, and because they have more competition, it means that prices generally have to lower and become more accessible for both men or women in terms of fashion. So if this debate is about insecurity, men are better off on the R end and women have more options on the R end. If this debate is about accessibility, clothes just become more affordable and more ubiquitous on both ends. If this debate is about standards, it's very clear that this is an opening opposition win. Thank you.
Great. I thank DLO for that fine speech. This brings us to the close of the top half. To open the back half, member government.
Okay, Keat is in the chat. The first thing I'm going to prove is just why the small or grassroots fashion brands already in the status quo have the correct representation for women. I think the first thing to say is that they have the strong tie with the feminist movement because majority of the entrepreneurs, they started up by those women who, who want to create more representation, right? That likely means those, women bosses or like some, like those women do have the closer knowledge and also epistemic access to understand the situation of the woman. Likely means that those women bosses, they already personally understand the situation of women suffering, right? That likely means those small grassroots fashion brands uniquely have less coercive beauty standard. But the problem is, comparatively on their side, the major fashion brands which prioritize women will be very tokenistic and going to misrepresent women, which are going to prove by my characterization of the big fashion industries. I think the first thing to say is just on their side, designers are usually white males who are well educated. For example, they already go to the white good elite university because the big fashion industries oftentimes require you to have the higher the diploma if you really want to become the designers, which is literally very hard for women who have little financial access to good university due to these systematic discrimination and also unequalized distribution of the educational resources. That likely means on their side, like oftentimes within in those major fashion industries, white males designers, they literally don't understand the real demand of the woman due to the segregation in the society and also the echo chamber within the media uniquely divide people into different groups. And therefore, oftentimes those white males, they do not have the basic knowledge to understand the suffering of the woman. They're not able to have the good ability to create right representation to the women in the society as a whole. But secondly, I think on their side, the major fashion companies, they literally need to commercialize the woman's identity across 3 reasons. Firstly, I think oftentimes they have the huge financial like pressure, given the fact they need to, publicize the financial monthly report. That likely means shareholders require those major fashion companies to get the good financial income, right? This means that oftentimes those companies, those giant or major fashion companies, they have the incentive to do a lot of things like commercial propaganda, or even they have the over advertisement to attract more women. Therefore, on their side, you actually create kind of consumerism, which led a lot of women to fall into that trap, and therefore their life gonna be bad, gonna be even worse. I think secondly, those big fashion companies have the higher labor costs because they need to hire more workers in the factories, and therefore they have the huge incentive to just literally attract more consumers by commercialization. But I think certainly on their side, I think those giants or like major fashion companies, they have huge capacity to do like marketing, right? I think this means 4 things. Firstly, you create a norms of the beauty standard. Uniquely, oftentimes, you create a discussion which is surrounding the appearance. But secondly, you're also going to have an advertisement in every corner of the life, and therefore this is going to uniquely very eye-catching, and therefore a lot of women are going to just blindly buy a lot of expensive clothes. But certainly also likely be discussed by your peers or by family members. But also I think finally you're going to generate a kind of monopoly because you are major fashion industries. This means that you have the huge economic capacity to kick out any competitors, and therefore there's literally no competition. Just flip DPM. I think the implication here is just to say, given the commercialization from those major fashion companies, the women going to spend a lot of time on making themselves look beautiful, while the men, they don't need to, and they have more time to do other things. Like, for example, you have the free time, to just enjoy yourself. You have more agency. For example, you can work more to make more money or learn more skills, right? But on the other side, how this woman just literally just literally do things like makeup, and therefore you have less time to realize the self-actualization. I think secondly, right, second extension, why the major companies when they prioritize or include men, why those kind of grassroots fashion, companies will be better off, and also women will be better off. I think there are 2 broad things here. Firstly, I think in our world, once those major fashion companies, they prioritize men, they have less market proportion for the female branch, right? That likely means those kind of grassroots fashion companies, they can opt in because they have more market proportion, given the fact that the giant companies, they just withdraw. This means that consumers uniquely can go to other alternative in our world, right? But the problem is on their side, when those kind of major fashion companies prioritize women, they just literally kick out any competitors, and therefore the grassroots cannot survive. I think there are 2 broad reasons. Firstly, the major fashion companies, they have the first mover advantage in the female tag, and therefore you probably already have a lot of the consumer base, and therefore it's very easy for them to kick out grassroots if they do continuously explore the market as a whole. But secondly, I think there's crowd out effect because the media discussion is just literally around the female products from the major fashion companies as opposed to small or grassroots fashion companies, and therefore for those kind of grassroots company who are able to provide correct and good representation cannot literally survive because they cannot attract any attention. I think the implication here is just to say, at the point where those major fashion companies prioritize and include men, they're able to allow the grassroots fashion company to survive, and therefore there's good representation. I think the second comparative we want to defend is just to say, in our world, those kind of men, when they are also going to invest in beauty standard when the new norms are created and when the discussion is just literally raised, right? We literally concede that objection will happen anyway, in those major fashion companies. But we think it's good when it happens to men. I think the first thing to say is that men are going to call out the major fashion companies. They're going to call out, oh, those kind of fashion companies are super oppressive. That likely means they're able to generate a kind of very, very controversial discussion, and therefore easily women can also join this kind of discussion to uniquely counterbalance this kind of oppressive norm of the beauty standard. This means that once this kind of discussion or call out is generated by the males, those females can also opt in and therefore justify this kind of things. And therefore, I think oftentimes those major fashion companies will improve themselves given the call out from the men, from the males are literally super powerful because as we explained, oftentimes males already dominate a lot of social discussion in the reality, and therefore the criticisms from those males are going to be very powerful, and therefore for the fashion industry as a whole, they have the incentive to democratize and also to, create a kind of, products which is going to generally or directly benefit those women as a whole, and therefore is not going to be so coercive in terms of the beauty standard. I think comparatively on their side, even if there's still call out from the women on their side, the voices is gonna be small because the voices from those females are super marginal. They, especially we are living in the context of patriarchy, and therefore oftentimes this kind of call outs is gonna be super ineffective. I think the way in here is very simple. I think opening up try to say that there's overrepresentation from the males. I think this exists anyway because males already dominate social discourse in the media. For example, like the artworks glorify the identity of males. Like in the films, most of the major characters are males, and therefore I think this kind of additional harm for opening up position is super marginal CG.
Great. I thank member government for that fine speech. I invite member opposition.
Hello, can I check if I'm audible?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think that this debate is about something that is very, very simple. Does it make economic sense for businesses to actually invest more in men as primary consumers, right? I think that this boils down to a very simple thing of Venus and Mars. It is about nature, it is about personality, about how little girls just want to feel pretty and clean and little boys like to play in the mud. Yes, that is a stereotype, but I do think that that is the prevailing norm that constitutes our society, that most men, most boys just don't care so much about their looks, about their clothes in particular. Okay, yes, women are exploited. I think that was what CG was trying to say. Yes, but I think that women are subjects of market exploitation and beauty standards, but I think that most women are fairly happy doing so. Even plus sized women who perhaps cannot fulfill beauty standards of being thin. I think that there are plus size models now, plus size models for example Victoria's Secret. I think that even plus size women feel happy to buy, clothes that make them feel pretty. I think that this is a very simple matter of Venus and Mars. Women just like to feel pretty. So in terms of market base and economic sense, I think it just makes economic sense for businesses to, to expand on female fashion, right? And I think that there are other ways for men to express themselves and to gain self-confidence, right? I think that actually, from what I observe, men care more about tangible goods for status and for self-confidence. This comes in examples such as having a car, having a Maserati, different types of cars, or having watches like Rolexes. I think that these are things that perhaps men use for self-expression and to have self-confidence as a status symbol, right? For example, if I'm a very sports kind of guy, then I prefer to have a sports car, like a Ferrari. If I'm more classy-ish, I would want to have a Mercedes, for example. I think that there are avenues for men to express themselves and gain confidence, right? And I think that another my second layer of analysis on why it doesn't actually make economic sense is that there are just simply less styles for men. This is just something that you cannot deny. For women, we have denim skirt, maxi skirt, we have sundress, maxi dress, mini dress, halter top, blouse, tube top, crop top. There are just so many different types of clothing that women wear, right? And I think that just because of this, there are more ways for fashion brands to expand women's fashion. So I think that is a very simple matter of Venus and Mars and a very simple matter of how many types of clothes can a woman wear, right? And while you might say that this is stereotypical, but I think that this is just the reality of our society, that women like to feel a bit prettier, right? And I do think that there are sufficient styles for men, right? There are niche small brands that cater to men. For example, I don't know if you know, Tell Your Children in Singapore, these caters to the smaller proportion of men who care a little bit more about their clothes, right? There is representation. For example, Harry Styles dresses up in very, very loud, expressive fashion. There's nothing wrong with a man doing that. It's just that the majority of men are just not like that. And I think that is something that no one in this debate can deny. Okay, so I'll move on to my second tier of analysis about how gender norms and stereotypes are just entrenched in society. They're just different things that are expected of men and women. Albeit I would concede that these things are changing, but I think that it is still there, right? For example, for women, expected to be a good mother, a caregiver, a natural, loving, take care of your husband, and of course, like look good, right? And I think fashion is a form of empowerment for all types of women, like whether you're rich, whether you're poor. There are multiple fashion brands that cater to you, and you feel good when your husband thinks that you look good, right? I think so. So this is the characterization of for women. What are the expectations of men, right? You are expected to perhaps be a breadwinner, to be a provider. As much as we do, advocate for gender equality, I think that every girl out there just, likes your boyfriend to maybe provide for you, to be a protector. And I think that there is like nothing wrong with that, although that this is changing, but this is still currently the norm, right? So on top of like having to earn money and protect your family and work like 6 days a week, a man is expected to look good too, right? I think that this is not a problem for men who are like a bit richer, right? Like you go to a country club, you have a lot of free time, you're like a business owner, you're a boss. But what about the men who are poor, the men who are like blue-collar workers? On top of like working 6 days a week, I have to think about what I wear and whether I look good, and then my wife is gonna like have to par me up with like some rich dude that has like half a day to dress himself. I think that that's just not really how it works, right? And this is not only disadvantageous to like men from lower income backgrounds, this is also disadvantageous to women across the board, right? Like we just want, like, yes, we want our men to look good, but we don't want our men to like look better than us. I think this just boils back down to the Venus and Mars thing. Before I move on, I'll take a POI.
Opening, closing?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Understand that on both sides of the house, these other factors in order to gain confidence are still existent. The reality of things is there are just some things that are exclusive to them, such as the first impression that you get from when you look good or look bad. These are things that can only be done via your look, and you put it up to a birth lottery in opposition.
Yeah. I agree. A man can still look good. I think that there are still brands out there. I think Oo told you that there's like Armani, there's Hugo Boss. These are brands that cater exclusively to men. I'm not saying that if you have an interview, you can't dress up because your female interviewer will feel insecure. No, that's absolutely not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that it's a Venus and Mars thing. It doesn't make economic sense, firstly. And it's just like your wife just doesn't want to be upstaged. Like, is that so hard to understand? Like, you want to go to an interview, there are many shops out there for you to buy nice clothes. Like, it's just whether or not you are the primary, whether fashion brands should view you as a primary consumer. I think that is like the main point of contention. And I think that it just doesn't make economic sense for that to be the case, right? And I just want to end off by talking about how like everything in this world is currently about men. Like it's just very hard to deny that fact, right? In your career, we have glass ceilings for women. Why? Because women biologically have to get pregnant. Inequality just exists in nature, right? Like when you go to for like a career interview, like your interviewer is maybe gonna prefer a man. In your family, families tend to prefer sons. Why? Because during, for example, Chinese New Year, the son is the one that eats with the parents, right? Daughters get married out. I prefer to have a son because my son can carry on my family name. For family, for career, men are dominating, the sphere, even for sport, right? Because men are just biologically more muscular. I think this back to the Venus and Mars thing about how men are just more into sport. Like you just can't deny that. Like they like to roll in the mud or something, right? I'm not saying that this applies across the board, but this is just the reality of our consumer base. So why let Venus remain in its natural state? I just want to end off.
Great. I thank member off for that fine speech. Invite Kafib.
Okay, POIs directly interrupt me. I'll try to take one from opening or closing. Time to start in 3, 2, 1. Gender inequality accrue when economically men and women are different. That men do not need to put up makeup and wake up early to go to work. Men are not judged by their appearance of what they wear when they go to interviews. They do not care about specific details of their fashion. But women are literally entrenched in their minds that they have to do this, or else people will judge them in unfavorable manners. This is done through fashion trends. This is done by the society. It's done through norms, and that reinforces women to care about their appearance. Now, quickly response to CO. Note, if you want to shift the focus of a debate to an actor incentive motion, you have to prove why, as this House believes motion does not specifically entail that we have to stand in the viewpoint of a fashion trend. Secondly, even if that is the case, we'll engage with your paradigm. The fact that men are investing in gym memberships, that skincare products and skincare products in status quo signifies that this is a good way for marketing to go. The entire speech coming from closing opposition is simply more mechanization for closing government to demonstrate how oppression have deeply rooted in women, who's constantly choosing for more stylish, for fighting for more beauty on them. The fact that we tell you that norms are powerful with social media, are powerful with ads that would Jamin had previously mechanized to you, this means that it is likely for these corporations to do this as they have the incentive to explore niche markets. And secondly, this will create huge impacts within social media, within discussions between men to compete each other within like corporation or within the dating scheme, so on and so forth. We still win within this paradigm. Secondly, let's compare with upper house and engage with upper house content. First, engaging with opening opposition. Opening opposition talks about men does not need more clothes. It's not necessary because they are more minimalistic. This is exactly because that the norms aren't and the standards are not created for them. You do not care about the outfits, and men dress in similar gowns similarly in parties and like different kind of social interactions. They do not need more, therefore they need more diversification. They need more emphasis and priority from these large fashion brands for example, focusing on different color schemes, different styles, and so on and so forth. Then also talks about that men are pragmatic shoppers and women are also pragmatic shoppers, just in different dimensions. This is why this is far more accessible when the fashion trend makes men also pragmatic to care about what they wear in different scenarios. OO's main contribution is that women needs more fashion and men should not be involved within the discussion of fashion. They're simply implying that the pernicious fashion machine should prey on women more and more and take away their freedom and money. Comparatively, men can just slay off without being involved within this discussion. They talk about color and size for women to have more opportunities and more possibilities for minorities to express themselves. However, even in this comparative, closing government comes in and beat on their best case scenario. When my partner comes in and tell you that small fashion brands exist within the status quo, this is with the feminist movement advocating for countering gender norms. Grassroots companies and corporations are far likely going to be better off on the comparative. This is meaningful because it ties in with the same benefit that opening opposition characterizes and try to advocate for you. However, CG benefits is far more likely to be accessible and less coercive, because when fashion trends and fashion big corporations do it, they're gonna do it tokenistically. They do not understand you. They're gonna have designers coming from elitist universities, who graduated from elitist universities, and so on and so forth. On the comparative, when you have local corporations who are likely going to be women, who are likely going to understand women, these are far likely going to produce products that suits the minorities better on our side of the comparative. Secondly, engaging with POI, if you have one.
Local isn't better. Smaller companies that have demographics that aren't represented elsewhere can charge surpluses. Also, we already explained why more standards for men are also bad for women, as well as being bad for men too.
I'll engage with that later. Comparing with adding a few more impacts. The problem with the comparative is that we told you when men engages within the discourse of trends, within the discourse of trends and beauty standards, when norms are created for men and they join in the discussion, it is going to be better for both genders. When men call this because this is likely going to be extremely controversial and something that they haven't experienced before, they're likely going to meet resistance, and calling out this is too oppressive. This is when it is better because women can join in within the discussion to counteract the oppressive norms of beauty standards that fashion trends have long been building up throughout the years of their monopolization. Second, when even if this is not likely going to happen, if you do not buy this scenario, we still likely stand, because even if the discussion does not happen, simply when men experiences this is good, because there's more equal opportunities on the stage for women, as well as men have to pay resources, have to pay a portion of their income to care about their fashion, about their outfit, to care about fashion trends, to invest their time on to make themselves look more appealing. While women, even if they also does the same thing, it brings a more equal environment for them to compete, therefore decreasing the supposedly glass ceiling that opening opposition tried to advocate for in a sense. Local In addition, we believe that local companies will be more accessible because they will also consider local demands of women as opposed to big companies who will only more likely care about their largest spending demographic, which are usually white and powerful in this regard. Now, comparing with our opening, closing government steps in. By one, comparing to opening line, who argue that fashion will empower males, closing government takes the worst case scenario that even if major fashion companies objectify males and harm them, this is good for women because they will be better off, and when the call all happen, or when generally it's more equal for them to compete in similar standards. Secondly, accessibility as a benefit for men. Note that top fashion trends are usually expensive. People do not have the time to invest in it, and it's likely going to be a portion of the population that can access. Note that oppression is universal and perpetuating throughout society, therefore the impacts are more important on scale and long-term effects on society. Proud to host. Thank you.
Great, I thank Gav for that fine speech. Final speech of the House, Op Whip.
All right, 3, 2, 1. 3 things in the speech. Firstly, on how this will impact male self-confidence and self-expression. Secondly, on how this impacts women. And thirdly, on whether this makes economic sense for these fashion companies and the derivative impacts for women. So firstly, on male self-confidence and self-expression. What we tell you is that small brands in status quo or even medium-sized brands do exist to represent the needs of like 50+% of the global population. We told you that there are small boutique labels that exist for men, and there are also like medium-sized brands like Hugo Boss. And so if the stereotype in this room is agreed upon that men don't really dress well, the logical reasoning for this is probably that they just don't care that much in status quo. What my member told you is that men today probably care more about like practical goods, things like a car, a watch, houses, or like providing for their family and being like the breadwinner for the family and providing for the children. The derivative impact of this is that to the extent that men in status quo don't really care so much about fashion, and major fashion brands decide to expand their product line to be more inclusive towards men, these men are going to feel insecure because never in their life had they have to think about fashion, how to dress, whether they dress well or not. And now it is apparently easy for them to dress well. Whenever a woman walks into their favorite big store, they see like this massive selection of male clothing with like no one buying it, and they probably will pressure their partner to dress better. This means that men in this world are likely to feel insecure about their own fashion sense because up till now they have not cared, and now it has become like a major point of concern for women. So, and for men who do want to express themselves through fashion, who want to make the effort to like dress very like loudly, to express their personal beliefs through their fashion, that exists in status quo through boutiques. So on both sides of the house, these people are able to express and able to attain self-confidence. It's a wash on both sides of the house. Secondly, on how this will impact women. Government bench argues that boutiques instead will thrive when these fashion labels kind of exit the female fashion market and move into the male fashion market. The impact of this is probably just that prices are going to be really, really high for the female fashion audience. Like if you look at boutique label pricing, it's probably $200, $300. And this definitely is going to harm women because they have from young, they care a lot about their looks, they consume a lot of fashion yearly. And so when they're given no alternative, it's either that they're going to be spending a lot of money with boutique labels, or they're just not going to be able to engage in fashion, not going to be able to express themselves the way that they have always been able to. And this is going to make them feel insecure and unhappy. And secondly, fashion culture today just probably makes a lot of women happy. They enjoy having these seasonal trends in their favorite stores, seeing different variations of outfits, seeing new things being released every few months. And these changing trends are enabled by big fashion because they have big teams behind many designers to come up with all these labels. They have facilities and they have connections with factories to be able to change their product line every few months. And this enables females around the world to access affordable quality clothing that allows them to express themselves and gain happiness. When we get these fashion labels to move towards men, women are going to lose out and not be able to express themselves. Thirdly, on the economics of this, just realize that men make up 50% of, or over 50% of the global population. To the extent that it's true that big fashion labels today don't really cater towards the male audience after all these years of capitalism, it's probably true that they have decided that this is the amount of stock that men are interested in, that this is how much selection that they can offer before they start losing money because they're trying to pander too much to the male audience. So firstly, there's a significant difference in priorities between male and female audiences when shopping for fashion. For male, they prefer more utility or more practical items to purchase. So they'll buy watches, and they buy watches, shoes, and other things that show like that they're well-to-do, that they're doing well in life to impress their colleagues. They are less likely, or maybe they like invest in a suit. They're less likely to invest so much in fast fashion. So men are likely to be uninterested when these big fashion labels expand. And the impact of this for big fashion labels is they are unable to achieve the large scale of production for these clothing items that they want to pander to the male audience. And therefore, they will not be able to maintain the low costs that make these big fashion labels so successful. The reason these fashion labels are successful is because they can produce in massive amounts to the female audience. When you're trying to increase the selection to include men, you're reducing the amount, you're going to reduce the amount of goods per item that you're able to sell, and therefore costs are going to go up. Before going, I'll take your POI.
We told you, in the absence of getting a lot of males to care about looks, they force their expectations of women because they don't have to be held to similar standards. How are your impacts worth trading this off on your side? And why does it still beat our economic benefit of tapping on an undervalued demographic that has little choice because of the few stores you want to state your case on?
The truth is that there are many stores for men to purchase from. The reason why big fashion doesn't have a larger selection for men is just that they can't make the economic case to increase the selection. And so therefore, the final impact of this is that in a world where fashion labels stop prioritizing women and decide to prioritize men, their bottom line, the costs are going to go up while having to maintain low prices to pander to the male audience. And what this likely means is that the cost of female fashion is going to have to go up so that these fashion labels can still continue to generate money overall. So the cost of female fashion has to go up for these large labels, which makes fashion less accessible for the primary audience of fashion for the past decades. And this limits their ability to express themselves and gain self-confidence. Very proud to oppose.
Great. I thank OPIP for their fine speech. I thank all 8 speakers for an engaging debate. Can we close the recording?
Thank you so